Alright students, in this video I'm going to show you how to solve literal equations. But first of all, let's go ahead and define what a literal equation is. An equation that uses two or more variables. Two or more variables, we call it two or more variables is called a literal equation. So take a look at the first three examples here. They're all literal equations because they have at least two variables. We have an x and a y on each of them. And so we're going to see examples where we have three or more variables too. But anything that has two or more variables, we call it a literal equation. So in literal equations, they're going to ask us to solve for one variable or the other one. So just pay attention to the instructions. In the first three examples, we're going to solve for y. So solving for y means to leave the y by itself. So we have to start by, in example 1a, we have to start by adding 1 to both sides. So we could get 11. And then since we are trying to let the y by itself, we continue by subtracting x from both sides. So we know then that y is equal to, on the right side, be careful because 11 doesn't have x's. We can't combine the 11 with the negative x. So we could write this as 11 minus x, which is perfectly okay. You could also switch them around and say this is negative x plus 11. Same thing. Okay, so just be aware you can't combine the 11 with the negative x because they're not like terms, okay? Question number 1, exercise 1b, or example 1b. We're going to try to leave this y by itself. So I'm going to start by subtracting 5 from both sides. And I should be a little more accurate and put that 5 next to the 1 or under the 1 because we can't combine it with the 3x. But we could combine it with the 1 because they are like terms. And so now since we're trying to solve for y entirely, we're going to continue by dividing by negative 3 on both sides. And on the right side, we simply get y, which is a good thing because we want it y by itself. But on the left side, if you could divide it out. 3 divided by negative 3, if you just look at this part, 3 divided by negative 3 becomes negative 1x. And then 6 divided by negative 3 becomes positive 2. So we could write the answer as negative x plus 2. And of course, you could switch them around and say this is 2 minus x. Either way, both answers are correct. Okay, continuing with this. Our goal is to let the y by itself. So let's go ahead and start by moving that 3x as a negative 3x to the other side. And we get negative 2y equals negative 3x minus 4. Because we're going to leave the y by itself, let's go ahead and divide both sides by negative 2. And in this case, negative 2 does not divide the 3. It does divide the 4, but it's perfectly okay to leave the answer like this. But if you decide to divide, you could do this. Negative divided by a negative on the 3 and the 2. It's going to be a positive 3 over 2x. And negative 4 divided by negative 2 makes positive 2. So you can leave the answers either this way or that way. They are still correct. Okay, the second type of problems that we're going to see when we have literal equations and we're trying to isolate one variable would be something like this. How do we solve for a variable if there's two of them that are the same? And so the first way we should try is by combining like terms. If they are like terms, we could put them together like this. Then we continue by subtracting 3. And pay attention, we're solving for x this time. So it's perfectly okay to subtract 3 from y. And then we divide both sides by 8. Again, just like in the previous examples, 8 does not divide the y or the 3, so we can leave it like this. And as long as you have the x, the variable that you need to isolate by itself, you're good. On the next one, notice how we have x's on both sides of the equal sign. I like to want to move the one that is next to the y, because since we're trying to leave the y by itself, the x by itself, I think it'd be smart to leave that y alone and just subtract 3x from both sides. That'll give us 5x minus 6. And since we're trying to leave that x, we're gonna continue by moving that 6 to the other side. Again, we can't combine the y and the 6, so we have to write it as y plus 6. And then since we are going to leave that x by itself, let's divide by 5. And we're gonna get y plus 6 over 5, which is a perfectly okay answer as long as we have the variable by itself. Okay, 2 more examples really quick. On this one, we're going to use a little something called distributive property. So if we had x parentheses 2 minus 7 y, and if I wanted to distribute that x this way, that would give me 2x. If I distribute that 2x, that would give me negative 7xy. This is what we call distributive property. Notice how we distribute that x and we get this on the right side. Well, we could also do the opposite of that, or we could use this backwards. We could say that this problem on the right side, part C on the right side, is going to be the same thing as x parentheses 2x minus 7. 2 minus 7y. And we have to do it this way because these two are not like terms. They can be combined because that extra y. And so the way to do this is by using distributive property here. Distributive property. And once the x is by itself, we need to leave it by itself. I'm going to write that down again. I'm going to write it down again so that we can see what happens. And so because I want to leave the x by itself, all we have to do is divide both sides by this whole amount, which is 2 minus 7y. Because 2 minus 7y divided by itself becomes 1. That'll give us just 1x. And that's exactly what we needed to do, get that x by itself. So we went from the first step to the second one by distributive property. Then we just divide both sides by 2 minus 7y, and then we just simplify. If you understood that example, it's probably as hard as it's going to get in this section. Okay, so very similarly on the next one, but before we do that distributive property on this next one, I'd like to start by moving that 5 to the other side. And then I notice again I have 3x minus tx. They are not like terms. We're not going to be able to combine them. So in order for us to solve for x here, we're going to have to use distributive property. So x parentheses 3 minus t would be that. Because again, the x parentheses 3 minus t, when you distribute, you get 3x minus xt, or tx. And so that's why allows me to pull that x out. On the left side, we leave it the same way. And so to leave that x by itself, all you have to do is subtract by, or divide by 3 minus t. And this will give us our final answer. Isolating that x takes this. Subtract 5 from both sides, that is. Distributive property here. And then divide by t minus 3 minus t. And then finally we just simplify. Okay, go ahead and write this down in your notes. Review it carefully. And maybe you want to even try these problems all again by yourselves. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.